In the article, the author refers to two main discourses. She refers to firstly the boy discourse and then the gender equality discourse and how this has influenced education. The article suggests that despite these official policy discourses existing, there has not been any sustainable changes in educational policies or practices. The article also explores the idea that despite the fact boys are underachieving at certain subjects in comparison to girls, they still have an advantage when it comes to going on to higher education and higher paid careers. The author also suggests the idea that boys are oppressed by schools has been sensationalised by the media, with the government more likely to listen to media outcries rather than researchers' fact-based evidence, thus making it more difficult to address real problems with solutions. This populist theme in the anti-feminist movement is therefore creating divide between the sexes. Despite the fact the article is grounded in Finland, the author explores many contextualisations relating to European and international equality policies. It was written by Alina Lehelma, who is a professor at the University of Helsinki, who during her career has been a campaigner for women's rights, a lecturer of gender studies at various universities around Finland, and conducted many ethnographic studies in regards to gender and education. Lehelma encapsulates many themes that naturally align with the feminist movement, but also addresses ideas such as toxic masculinity and intersectionality. It could be argued that the problematic themes are largely inaccessible to a proportion of the modern audience, who now believe that gender equality has been won, and therefore count this as an irrelevant read. I personally found this article very interesting, and as a young woman, some of the ideas the author portrayed felt very relevant to me and instances in my own life. And as a person who believes in gender equality, I thought the article was thought-provoking and gave a really in-depth look at gender discourses in a European setting. The article was also useful because I hope to become a primary school teacher after finishing university. Lehelma suggests that the issues of gender and gender inequality are difficult for teachers to grasp, and as a future practitioner, it is useful to be well versed in gender equality, not only to challenge, but mainly educate and give children thought-provoking ideas. Lehelma firstly talks about social policy and how that relates to gender equality discourse. She cites Finland as being an interesting case study because of the achievement in the PISA study, which stands for Programme for International Student Assessments. This is because in all subjects Finland ranks amongst the best, at the same time having one of the biggest gender gaps out of the participating countries. And the UK is one of those participating countries. This suggests that despite the fact girls are doing better in most subjects at school, they are still struggling to break through the glass ceiling when it comes to higher paid employment and major disadvantage on the labour market. The author also gives an example of policy documents at European level. There has been a study by the European Commission of gender differences in educational outcomes, known as Eurydice. The overview presented in the Eurydice report suggests that with few exceptions, all European countries have or plan to have gender equality policies in education. The primary aim, according to this overview, is to challenge traditional gender roles and stereotypes. Other objectives include enhancing the representation of women in decision-making bodies. This is when the author goes on to ask the question, why is it that the more towards the stated aims for gender equality makes it seem more an impossible mission? Fellow professor at University of Helsinki, Christina Brunilla, suggests that this inequality still exists due to the fact that any equality policies that have been put in place have only been conducted in the short term. Gender and gender inequality are so deeply entrenched in cultures and societal structures globally, as well as embodied in most people's subconscious subjectivity. thus showing that any policy changes conducted by any government globally are still unhelpful to achieving gender equality. These gender projects are often seen as feminist-only issues and overall challenge a sense of equilibrium within society. To put it plainly, most people in society do not like change. This was an interesting point in the article because Lehelma failed to explain why feminism is seen as a female-only movement. The true definition of feminism is the political, economic and social equality of the sexes. There are so many facets of feminism that would benefit males as well, such as equal paternity leave, custody claims over children after relationship breakdowns, as well as challenging ideas of what it means to be a man, and most importantly, toxic masculinity. Male suicide is now rising every year in the UK, and the Office for National Statistics report in 2019's findings that the UK male suicide rate is 16.9 in 100,000, and for females it was 5.3 in 100,000, thus showing there is something that affects men's mental health disproportionately to female mental health. And could toxic masculinity and gender inequality have something to do with that? But to suggest that this is the only reason as to why males are more likely to commit suicide is perhaps too simplistic, and there are other reasons which affect mental health rather than just society's expectations. The second discourse Lehelma explores is the boy discourse. This discourse is based around the fact that boys are underperforming in education and the reasons behind it. Lehelma claims that this discourse was created by the media and accuses them of creating a moral panic starting in the 1990s. She goes on to suggest that this discourse has its background in current statistics and achievement tests instituted by restructuring policies with a neoliberal focus on standards and competition and a neoconservative focus on basic skills, thus suggesting quantified results have now become a measurement of intelligence, and by doing this, it's actually causing more harm than good for boys educationally. Behind this new concern have been structural changes in westernised countries in which direct routes from school and manual work have been limited, therefore suggesting that working futures of working class boys have been challenged. And we can see the same thing happening here in the UK. Thatcherism destroyed employment opportunities due to the closure of the mines, starting in the mid-1980s. The closure of the mines disproportionately affected men, and subsequently, communities have been plagued with unemployment, and many families in northern England and Wales have not recovered from this since. Boys from higher socio-economic backgrounds have also experienced difficulties because more girls are applying for the same fields of education and employment. Lehelma also suggests that in Finland, despite girls on average achieving better grades, they were less likely to be accepted to go on to higher education, and she concretes her earlier argument regarding the media by suggesting this information was not published by the Finnish media. Instead, they published articles titled "School Oppresses Boys." Lehelma cites an interview published by a main Finnish newspaper about the results issued by PISA. They published the following assumptions: boys lag behind girls, working methods in schools are such that boys lack eagerness to learn, and boys are at a difficult age and learn better by doing. These ideas are based on developmental theories that suggest boys develop slower than girls. The assumptions could fit into three main discourses highlighted by Epstein and et al., all centering around boys will be boys, poor boys, and blaming schools. These are all really stereotypical attitudes towards boys and are ultimately limiting for them, as it shows boys' low achievement is inevitable. These ideas are similar to the archaic beliefs expressed towards women before the latter 20th century, that suggested a woman's purpose was to solely be a wife and a mother. This was also exemplified by schooling subjects where girls were expected to do domestic sciences and sewing, subjects designed to train them to be the perfect housewife. Lehalma suggests that this boys' discourse is well regarded by teachers, who have experience with boys having difficulty in achievement, attainment and behaviour at school more often than girls. She explores the idea that teachers turn a blind eye to wrongdoings by boys in favour for class participation, and plan the school day in relation to subjects boys enjoy more. Lehalma then goes on to cite her own earlier fieldwork, where a teacher allowed 2 boys to show a violent and sexist video to the class because it was the first time they'd ever participated. The teacher's reasoning to this was, the boys will get practice performing, and they will remember they got to choose. This example of pedagogy for boys is surely emphasising toxic masculinity that contributes to these boys' underachievement. Not only this, but this behaviour is also at the expense of the rest of the class. Lehalma suggests that gender categorisation, the idea that boys are completely different and have nothing nor will have anything in common, is also behind the boys' discourse. She argues that teachers alter school curriculums to better fit boys by choosing to do more sport and drama, subjects that boys generally enjoy more. The author here does not take into account that it is perhaps unfair to presume that boys' underperformance is wholly their own fault, and does not affect them negatively later in life. To make this generalisation that all boys cannot do systemic work, and girls' overperformance is bad for all boys, is not necessarily the case. By listing girls and boys into dichotomies is divisive. Lehalma then goes on to explore intersectionality, suggesting that this categorisation is ignoring differences in relation to other dimensions. Furthermore, working class and/or minority ethnic boys' low achievement in school is often framed as a question of gender, not ethnicity or class. Studies also suggest that boys who do well in school are often targets of bullying, and words like nerd and geek are casually used in the playground, and this can be really upsetting for young boys who may decide to sacrifice their studies in favour for not being the target of bullying. These instances are even more likely to happen if the boy is from a working class background. With the knowledge of these ideas, it becomes more obvious as to why boys aren't doing as well as in education. It is important to remember that educational equality policies are not only designed to promote gender equality in education, but also through education. Education is there to improve the status of people, whatever gender. However, Lehalma suggests even though girls are achieving more academically in school, they have trouble breaking through the glass ceiling when it comes to higher paid wages and careers. She argues that there is a strong gender segregation in higher post-compulsory education. Also, she notes that in female-dominated professions, entrance tests and criteria were in general more selective than male-dominated professions. Schooling is organised in such a way that a male-dominated profession, such as an electrician, only need upper secondary education, whereas a primary school teacher, a mostly female-dominated profession, requires a bachelor's degree. She suggests more women go into higher education because of this. Despite the fact Lehalma lists some important discourses regarding gender, she fails to talk about anything outside of the male and female binaries, without any acknowledgement for those who do not fit into these binary categories. Statistics show that LGBTQ+ children are more likely to be bullied in school, according to the school report. This could be attributed to the heteronormativity in schools. It also can be suggested that this is because of bullying. They are more likely to truant in school, and this eventually leads to lower academic attainment. There is an argument to suggest this article focuses too much on female-only problems, and this also highlights the divide between girls and boys. Lehalma fails to suggest any meaningful changes for the boys' discourse. In addition to this, Lehalma is writing from an educated, socio-economically advantaged point of view, And although she does not exemplify bias in her argument, it could be argued that she does not fully understand the struggles of working class and/or ethnic minority boys. In conclusion, it could be argued that the ideas portrayed by Lahama in the article are of interest, perhaps especially to childcare practitioners. The two discourses discussed in the article are both important when thinking about educational attainment of both binary genders. It shows the importance of gender awareness in education and that it is needed to combat dualistic and confrontational positions. However, she also suggests that these discourses have done little to create any sustainable changes, and that teachers struggle to grasp issues of gender and gender equality effectively. Unfortunately, this article could be seen as irrelevant to a large proportion of the population that believe gender equality has been won. Also, it could be argued that just the word feminism denotes radical ideas and burning bras, which ultimately closes down discussion. There is perhaps a danger that the achievements of women's movement will be reversed and women's interests will be obscured if there is an obsessive focus on the boys' discourse. Indeed, Lahama is researching and writing from a higher socio-economical person's point of view, and perhaps is not taking the struggles of working class or ethnic minority boys into full perspective. She also fails to take into account anything outside of the male and female binary, without regard for the LGBTQ+ people, which obviously make up a proportion of the academic year. And if they don't fit into a gender category, are they more likely to be a target of bullying, which could lead to truancy and thus impacting educational attainment? It could be suggested that the debates and issues raised by the author display a need for a shift in cultural attitudes towards gender in all forms of education. Moreover, it could be argued that life for girls is actually more difficult recently because of girl power discourses, which can actually create more pressure to be the perfect woman or girl rather than gender equality. Furthermore, girls are now expected not only to encompass all facets of femininity, but masculinity also. For example, the increase of mental health and eating disorders in the youth could be because of this added pressure to be a new level of perfection.